computer. All right. Let's get started here. I'd like to share my screen. Let's see if I can do this. All right. We're not playing around. We're here to teach ourselves a little bit of scalpel warfare. All right. And scalpel warfare is, of course, close combat, and it's violent and it's wonderful. The course is not going to be about combat. It's about how to win against overwhelming odds when you don't have the resources that you think you should have. We are actually good at this. This is part of our human history in recent years. In the United States, we actually get off on killing people in their sleep at Christmas. And so why shouldn't we talk about other people doing that? All right. To get started here, I do want to point out that this is meant to be your friend throughout all of this. Because we cover a lot of territory, I tried to get questions to help guide you along. Now, I didn't get through all the reading questions. I probably got through the first, maybe half or so. But I've gone through every one of my lectures, and as a help to you, I've put notes down or questions to help you follow along. And so if it were me, I would go right to page 1, pass the prefaces a little bit, and we'll talk about all this stuff today. All right. I see some people getting up to get their book, and that's absolutely appropriate. Cheers. I guarantee you it's coffee. All right, let's get started. To begin talking about our kings, well, first of all, you should know there's going to be a lot of information, but it's going to make sense to you. I want you to concentrate on how to use this information, because you're going to use this information. Right? I'm going to make you use this information. When I talk about the 3 faunas, I'm using this really as an image. I'm using this as a way of understanding human culture and human activity based on how animals have evolved. And you'll see how this works here. But this is just an image for right now. It is not how human beings fit into it, because we're one of the 3 faunas. We actually live in the last group. All right. When you're talking with evolutionary biologists, we talk about the 3 faunas: the Cambrian, the Paleozoic, and then modern critters. The Cambrian stuff is all worms and other crazy things, mollusks. The Paleozoic stuff is all dinosaurs, so different in kind, right? And also more modern in time. And then, of course, there are people and koala bears and deer and groundhogs. Those are modern fauna, all right? When you talk about the 3 faunas to evolutionary biologists, they also will want to talk about Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. That does not matter so much to me, right? But the 3 faunas are interesting and helpful to us because they get articulated one from another by extinction events. Now, extinction event does not actually imply extinction, all right? If you look at the group of mollusks and creepy crawlies, right? They still exist, don't they? They're still around. Except that they've been shown their proper place by later faunas, all right? There are still reptiles around, aren't there? All right, but they're not dinosaurs. They're alligators and geckos and chickens, right? So they weren't made extinct exactly. They were just brought down several rungs, and that made space, that made a niche available for more modern critters. All right, you following me? This is just critters right now. In a moment, we're going to extend this to people and groups of people. All right. By the time that our guys, the Capetians, and the word Capetian, by the way, if you look, that's actually just named after the very first guy on this list. All right. I am completely unclear how to say this in English. Hugh Capet. In French, we say Hugues Capet. All right. And now he had no idea that there was going to be a dynasty of 15 generations following him. He knew what was available, what knowledge was available to him only, right? But he is not the beginning of the first dynasty or royal family in France, all right? There had actually been two major dynasties or royal families and several minor dynasties that had ruled France, and we're going to talk about them. The first group, and you're going to need to know this word, all right? We call them the Merovingians, all right? If you ever watch the Da Vinci Code, Tom Hanks mispronounces this twice. He calls them the Merovingians, and it's not the Merovingians, it's the Merovingians, but nobody asks me, all right? The Merovingians, just like the Capetians, are named after somebody. They're named after Clovis's grandfather, a dude named Merovius. You don't need to know that name. We don't know whether Merovius was a legendary god or whether he was a human king. Clovis, however, was definitely a human king, and he's going to come up again and again and again. He was the first Christian king of France. And so later kings, in order to show just how Christian or just how king they were, will tab into the figure of Clovis again and again and again. All right, now this is now, geez, Clovis lived 500 years before Hugh Capet did. All right, so this is ancient history already for our guys, but he's going to become so important because he is the first, and in order to achieve legitimacy, in order to hold on to lineage, you have to build a lineage back, okay? This is what he got, all right? Do you see right in the middle there, there's sort of a dark blue. You see the words Royaume de Soissons, S-O-I-S-S-O-N-S. Do you see that there? That's what he originally gets. That's originally his home base. And right under the O of Soissons is Paris. Okay, and he makes Paris his home base, and he immediately sets to work. And he is a warlord. He is just one of the nastiest people you can possibly imagine. All right, and he expands from that based on his being crowned King of France. And the person who crowns him is also the person who converts him, okay? In 496, when he becomes king, the bishop refuses to crown him because he's not Christian. Clovis's wife is Christian, and there's all sorts of stories and legends on how he becomes Christian. But one of the stipulations that Remigius, this dude, places on Clovis is that he has to make of himself a new Constantine, or Constantine. Now you need to know who Constantine is. Does anyone want to hazard who that was? It's a name that you've seen before. And just call it up.
The first Christian Roman emperor.
There you go. There you go. The first Christian Roman emperor. And so you can see there is a one-to-one relationship between the first Christian Roman emperor and the first Christian French king. And this is a pretty cool move on St. Remigius's part. He says, make of yourself like an emperor. Right? Now, an emperor is bigger than a king, right? And the Roman Empire was incredibly successful and long-lasting. So it's one way of saying base your power on someone else's success. And this is why Clovis becomes so important.
Question, Professor.
Yes, please.
Is this before or after Charlemagne?
This is before.
Okay.
Before. And you're right to bring up Charlemagne. We're going to get to him in a second here, covering a lot of territory. But Charlemagne gets crowned emperor, Holy Roman Emperor, so the first emperor since the fall of the Roman Empire in the year 800. So he's afterwards, right? And he belongs to a different dynasty.
Gotcha.
Great question, and perfectly timed. You see at the end of Clovis's reign, that deep blue space is quite a bit bigger, and it goes over a little bit into Germany and south into Austria and almost over into Spain. All right, so we would call him successful and something of a mini emperor if you desire. He does this in very much the same way that Charlemagne does what he does. He does it, I don't know if you can see this on your screen here because it's blocked on mine. He does this with the aid of this wee little battle axe. It's called a Franciscus. You don't need to know that. The Franciscus here is actually it's an antique one, and you can't really see everything that would have been on it. I don't know. Can you see my cursor? Can you see my cursor on your screen?
Yeah.
All right. Right there, you see that there's a little divot out of there. There used to be a hook that reaches down off of this blade like this. And they would use this Franciscus in ways that you're not prepared to even think about. All right. Sure, it's fun to bash people over the head with this thing. It's really fun to chop people's heads off with this thing. But really what you're supposed to do with it, you've got your shield in one hand, you've got your Franciscus in the other hand, is that you bum rush the person in front of you and you get that Franciscus and you hook it around your opponent's back. And then you hopefully get into like nerves, tendons, bones and stuff, and you yank your opponent closer to you yet. And then you can just start bashing him in the back with this. So it is exquisitely violent. And this tells you just how much of a Christian Clovis was. He was not necessarily a very good Christian. He was a hyper-violent warlord. But he was the first, and he was the model for later on, all right? But hyper-aggressive, and we're going to talk more about it. All right, now, there you go, Hunter. Now you've got your second dynasty, and we call them the Carolingians. So Merovingians after Merovius, Carolingians after people named Charles. Actually not Charlemagne, but Charlemagne's grandfather, a fellow named Charles Martel, which means Charlie the Hammer. And kind of the same sort of thing, all right? Hyper-violent warlord, happened to be the major domo, the sort of lord of the household of the actual Merovingian king. Merovingian king couldn't bring himself to act, and so Charles Martel said, sure, I'll take care of this, and basically said that shouldn't the person who is doing the kinging be the king? And we'll talk more about this too, all right? And this is, of course, what Charlemagne grabs, and he then gets himself named Holy Roman Emperor. He actually follows through on that exhortation of St. Remigius. He's the first one to make of himself a Christian emperor after the fall of the Roman Empire. Don't worry so much about this. These are Paleozoic. These are dinosaurs and creepy crawlies and mollusks. And we're going to talk about the mammals, the smart, interesting, warm-blooded creatures very shortly here. Interestingly, we do have Charlemagne's sword. He had several, but this is it. These old faunas get articulated from one another. They get separated from one another with extinction type events. And that's where it starts to get really interesting. Okay. The Merovingians didn't know what to do when the Saracens, which are Moorish tribes, invaded from the south. And then Shah Martel, Charlie the Hammer, he said, well, king, what are you doing? And the king, no one remembers that king, by the way. I can't even tell you right now. But that king kind of goes like this. And Shah Martel says, if you don't know what to do, I definitely know what to do. And so he raised his own army and he marched out and he beat the Saracens on the battlefield. And then, of course, said, if my king isn't willing to do this, I'm willing to do this, therefore I must be the king. Right? I'm king now. And it basically worked out that way. And his lineage also includes Charlemagne. Charlemagne simply means the big Charlie. You know, we had small Charlie, which was Charlie the Hammer, all right? And great big Charlie is Charlemagne. This is where we're starting to get into our realm, though, too, because the Carolingians get separated from our guys by an extinction level event, which are Viking raids. All right, and we have authentic period photographs of this happening. Okay, this is Paris. Paris originally was an island in the middle of the Seine. If you look in the deep background there, you can see something that looks like a temple. And it is a temple, was a temple. That's where Notre Dame presently stands. All right, you can actually go to this very spot and sit there and dangle your feet in the water if you dare. In beginning in 775 and reaching all the way into the 800s, the Vikings made increasing numbers of raids on Paris. And it was in the late 800s when 700 ships like this were towed upstream into Paris and attacked in force. All right, this looked for everyone involved like the end of the world. And the same sort of thing happened. Let's talk about this. All right, so when the Merovingians didn't know what to do and the Saracens invaded, someone zoomed in and said, I know what to do. And then after he did it, he said, since I knew what to do, I should be the one running the show. Same thing happens when the Vikings raid. At a certain point, now you're thinking, if I could dispel the idea of France from your mind, I would. France, at this period in time, is about the size of Roanoke County. All right. The city of Paris, what you can see here, was actually ruled by 4 different kings. You could walk across the street and enter a different kingdom, right? And it was a cluster of how on earth do we fight back, or how do we deal with tens of thousands of Viking invaders? Well, the old Carolingian king, because it goes back to this, remember the Carolingians are still around, but they're in this position where they say, well, how do we deal with this? The Carolingian king simply wrote the Holy Roman Emperor and said, what do we do? Again, throws up his hands, and the Holy Roman Emperor was not terribly helpful. He said, this one is easy, you guys. All you have to do is to cut these guys a huge check. Write them a huge check. Tell them to go away, and they will. So the Vikings looked at those bags of cash, and they said, you bet we'll go away, no problem. And then 1 year later, what did they think? That worked once, let's do it again, right? So you see how that answer, that solution, didn't help anything, but instead perpetuated the problem. Round about this time, one of those four kings that you see up in that little morass there, his name was Odo. Now, this is actually pretty fun. I have a student, Zach. Zach, are you there? Make some sound, Zach. Zach's last name is Odo. My middle name is Odo. I pronounce it Otto. It's a Germanic name, all right? Just like every one of our kings has a Germanic name, all right? Odo thought about this pretty critically here. It mattered to him. People were dying. His stuff was getting carried off. And he looked at the landscape and he says, what have we got? Who is our enemy? What could work on in our favor? And so he's looking at Paris. He sees Vikings coming toward him. And he realizes something. He says, these Vikings are going upstream. All right? To get to Paris, you have to go up against the flow. You start at the sea and you have to work your way upstream. And you do so by putting cables on your ships and hauling those ships up against the current. All right? And Odo looks at that, and then he looks at Paris, and he says, and there are bridges in Paris. Here's an idea. It's a pretty straightforward thing. He sets up furnaces on those bridges and all along these walls. And on those furnaces, he's warming up buckets of pitch and oil and water, and he's boiling all these things, and he has very simple orders. He says, if anyone attempts to make it under this bridge, burn them to death. He knows full well that if you're going to be towing a ship upstream using cables, that in order to get past a bridge, you have to pass the cable under the bridge. Think about this in your head. You can't put the cable over the bridge and keep pulling because then the boat will stomp right at the bridge. So instead, you have to send people under the bridge. He says, anytime you see somebody get close to the bottom of the bridge, burn them to death. Again, this is impressive, but it's impressive in a very different way. Buying peace only guaranteed that the Vikings would come back the next year. Burning the Vikings in their ships stomped them in their tracks. It was a hugely successful strategy. What was that strategy dependent on? He knew something about his enemy. He knew something about his landscape. And he was willing to do something different. Now, just giving the Vikings bags of money, it worked, but it also guaranteed that the Vikings would come back year after year after year. You see how ultimately that didn't change the situation, it solidified, consolidated the situation, whereas pouring boiling oil, that one solved the problem. Are you with me on this? What does this bring about? What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to build the Paleozoic, Cenozoic, Archaeozoic, all right? It brings about new kingship. Now we're not quite there to our Capetians, but there are all sorts of little kingships, each one that was successful in one way or another, lasted for a generation or two. People named Robert, people named Otto, so we call them the Robertians, the Ottonians, people named Boson, Bosonids, and they will rule on and off with the Carolingian kings for several decades. All right. So this is an extinction type event. Did it make Carolingians go away? No, it just showed all their weaknesses and pulled them down a few rungs in the same way that when the Saracens invaded and the Merovingian kings didn't know what to do. Well, someone did know what to do, and the person who knows what to do tends to take the power next. All right. This is all interesting because one of the things that Saint Remigius said to Clovis is that it's forbidden under pain of excommunication. Excommunication brings about your damnation, by the way, to crown a king of any other blood than that of Clovis. So when the Carolingians moved in, that was illegal. When the Robertians, Ottonians, Bosonids, and the Capetians moved in, that was illegal. And not just illegal, but like church illegal. Okay? So to switch from dynasty to dynasty is a gigantic deal. And then holding on to that power is a matter not only of life and death, but also of your eternal soul here. Got one more person coming in. Right? Don't worry about this little note. It'll come back to us. All right. There we go. Let's look at these extinction events critically. All right. When the Vikings show up, you have options. We know that because there were many kings, and many kings tried many different line items to try to make the threat go away. Unfortunately, giving the Vikings money to go away only brought the Vikings back 1 year later. So you see what that did is that added stability to an undesirable system, all right? Whereas pouring boiling oil onto people's heads, well, first of all, that is literally adding energy to the system. And in information theory, energy, novelty, information are all pretty much the same thing, right? And you can imagine that people who found themselves underneath that oil were noting just how novel that was, right? Oh, this is a new feeling. So which one works? Adding stability in a bad situation or adding novelty in a bad situation? You have to be very careful when you are in a situation that is uncomfortable. You have to be careful not to settle that situation so that it persists. So you want to add energy or novelty or change, right? There's more to it than this. When we talk about positive and negative feedback, so positive feedback, adding energy to a system. Negative feedback, removing energy from a system. Positive is adding novelty to a system, whereas negative is about adding stability or consolidating. It turns out that the military and the church tend to be about adding stability. Now this seems kind of a surprise here, but remember that Clovis with his wicked little Franciscus was counting on the church to support him, right? And the church did. When you think about the church at the time, you might consider how much the church is about stability, all right? This is Saint Anna Maria Taigi in Rome, and she looks like she's asleep, doesn't she? Right? She's not changing anymore, all right? She's incorrupt, unchangeable, all right? Why is this important? Because sometimes it's important for your belief system to have a lineage that's about stability, all right? Same thing goes with military hierarchies. At no point does the general say, well, what do my sergeants say? How should I solve this problem, right? He doesn't ask for advice because he doesn't want new advice, right? That stability is important. I also want to point out that this is maybe not exactly about extinction. I use that as an image, right? Lots of people were put to the sword, I understand, but really the Carolingians kept going on and off. They would hold this particular county, or they would um, be a bishop in this particular place or whatever. They would go on and off for several generations. So they didn't exactly disappear. Same thing with the Merovingians. I'm going to skip this for right now because you guys are going to get tired. All right, let's look at this. This is you guys. All right, and you're looking at yourself, you're looking at this and you say, this Venn diagram sees me in one way or another, right? Let's use this as a way of understanding positive and negative feedback, all right? Someone who is all about social life, are they about stability or are they about change? Think about that. Someone who is into his social life. Grossly speaking, they tend to be about change, novelty, having something new to do. Getting enough sleep tends to be about stability, right? You can figure out what good grades are. I think it's actually an interesting combination, but you can see kind of where you are in this. Well, we're going to play this game as well. Let me sneak past here. Heck, I'll do this in this way. By balancing positive feedback, the addition of change to a system, negative feedback, resistance to change in a system, you're going to notice that interesting things happen, that these tendencies, if you were to graph them out, will usually form some sort of sinusoidal function, okay? It's a pendulum, all right? A pendulum actually follows exactly that, that design. When you pull the pendulum up to one side and let it go, you are adding energy to the system. But it has a central tendency, doesn't it? And eventually it's going to slow down and find the middle, right? So away from central tendency is addition of novelty, addition of, in this case, potential energy that will turn into kinetic energy, right? Eventually, though, friction will cause that to slow and find a center again. Friction is about dissipating that energy that you originally put into the system, right? Another thing to look at is when you look at, say, presidential politics, we tend to have a sinusoidal or wave function between conservatism and liberalism, right? We'll have 8 years of one, and then we tend to have 8 years of the other. And the farther you go in one direction, the farther you'll go in the other direction, all right? This is about how dynamic systems, energetic systems, that's when I say dynamic, I mean energetic, this is how they work. This works in all sorts of places. This works in your dorm. This works in the political system. This works in belief systems. You're going to have functions that are there to add change to the system, and those are going to be resisted by functions that want to resist change. And generally, the system will be dynamic. It will be in movement. It will become energetic that way. Now, let's talk about tautologies for a second here. Now, I want you to know this term tautology. A tautology is a logical inconsistency that comes about because of 20/20 hindsight. All right. So let's say, for instance, all right, I'm a huge Rachmaninoff fan and an even worse Bach fan. Okay. And let's say that that I write down the following sentence. Bach, who lived in the 17th and 18th century, anticipated some of the choral writing of Rachmaninoff, who lived in the early 20th century. Now, could Bach have possibly known that in the 20th century there was going to be a composer named Rachmaninoff? No. So you see, what we're doing there is we're looking back at both of them in time and determining what a relationship must be from the benefit of our perspective, all right? But Bach, living in the 18th century, could not possibly have looked forward 200 years and say, oh yeah, I influenced him. You see what I'm getting at? Well, this becomes important when we think about what France is. If you look very carefully at this image, you'll see that there are some borders here. Now, I'm a French major. You see some borders along here. I'm a French major. I've been studying this place for a long time. I know what France looks like. It's supposed to be kind of hexagonal. Well, France didn't achieve this shape, this hexagonal shape, you know, down here towards Nice and Monaco, and then here at the Pyrenees, and all along here up in Belgium. It didn't achieve this shape until about 1860. All right. You have to get rid of this notion of what France is. All right. Paris is a city about the size of Roanoke in 987. All of France's holdings, all of Hugh Capet's holdings, are going to add up to maybe another 100,000 people. It is a ridiculously tiny little grouping of villages with a big city in the middle. All right, and so this is one of the reasons when we start talking about Hugh Capet, which is going to happen a later time, there's so little about him, because we look at him and we say he was important because he started this whole dynasty. He had no idea that he was starting a dynasty, you guys. He was just getting along. He was just making it, wasn't he? All right. So for us to look back at Hugh Capet and say, well, obviously he meant to start his dynasty. No. He meant to live until the next day. Okay. He had no idea we'd be talking about him in a place they had no clue about, in a language he didn't know, and all this. All right, so keep in mind that tautology is not your friend here. It's probably the perfect way of tripping yourself up, in fact. Right. All right. As we work through the semester, we're going to have a couple of privy councils. All right. A privy council is a way of advising the king. And when we are doing a privy council, I'm going to be the king. And you are going to be my advisors, my counselors. And so it's worthwhile that you know something about what the Privy Council was. Now you're looking at this word Privy Council. It contains the word privy. Do you know what a privy is?
A bathroom.
It's a bathroom. You're exactly right. It's the outhouse, isn't it? All right. And you're saying, why on earth would you name your council after your bathroom? Interestingly, now the president of the college doesn't use the term Privy Council, does he? What's his group of advisors? Or the president of the United States?
The cabinet.
The cabinet. Guess what? That's another word for outhouse. All right, so even when you use this term cabinet, the group of advisors that are on the inside are probably on the inside of something. All right, let me show you. All right, Privy Council has a bunch of people. Don't worry about this. The Privy Council can meet in a whole bunch of different places. This is one of the places that the Privy Council would meet. All right, this is the castle of Vincennes, which is just to the east of Paris. It was built by one of our guys, built by Philip Augustus, and then expanded by Louis IX, St. Louis. All right. And the privy is the John. It's the toilet. And it's that little chunk of an outbuilding there that sticks off the side of the castle keep. All right. And you're saying, now, how did this work? I will show you. I'm going to take you inside there. All right. If you can see my cursor here, the privy is up here. All right. You had, of course, stairwells to get up into this space, had storerooms, then you had this very interesting room we're going to get to, and then the privy itself. This right here, can you see where my cursor is? Somebody go like this if you can see my cursor. Good, thank you. That's the chute, right? You sit on top of that, go to the bathroom, and it goes to the outside of the building. All right? That little room, well, let me walk you around a little bit, is inside. I showed you this great big space here. The stairway's off to one side, and the privy is back here. All right, this is I know that the perspective is really weird because it's panoramic. And the privy looks like this. Oops, I'll show you this. You can't really see because it's pretty dark here, but there's a piece of stone over it because they don't want people to fall down it or use it or anything. That's the toilet. That's the John. And it's actually set up on a little platform, maybe 6 or 8 inches high, something like that. And the king would sit there. And the king would meet with all of his cabinet, his privy council, right there. All right. What does this do? What does this mean? Well, the king is inviting into his space, his very personal space, his cabinet. But also it puts the cabinet very much in their own place, right? If your closest advisors are people who get to watch you squat, your closest advisors are not at the same level of social status as you, are they? Okay. Now off to the left in this image, what I was looking at earlier, is this little room. This little room, it's no bigger than this little studio that I'm in right now, maybe a little smaller. It's got 2 very nice windows. If you look up, this little pillar here has an angel. Here's another angel. There's a fireplace. And behind me is a little desk. This is where the King of France sat, studied. He had, the sunlight through the window if he desired. And then when he wanted to meet with his privy council, he would simply step next door and sit down, and people would have to hear him. Just outside of that room, I said there was a unusual little room right outside of here. That's the treasury. And it's a room, again, no bigger than this space that I'm in right now. All right, so a little studio size. And it goes up about 20 feet. And you can just imagine that that room was full of bags of cash. And so if the king decided he wanted to go to war, he probably would have one very intrepid advisor say, "Excuse me, sir, but do you have the cash for that?" And the king would say, "Let's go and find out." And so someone would scurry into the next room and start counting. "Yeah, we can invade England, but we can't invade Italy," or something like that. All right. So all this stuff is in one spot. Now it's true that every palace, there were probably dozens of royal palaces scattered around. Every palace had its own privy council because the king had his own private toilet. That's where you'd have privy council. We're going to have privy council in this class. And you're going to advise me, and you're going to create things in that privy council. This is one way that we're going to unfold the content of the class. All right, let's keep going. Generally speaking, people in the privy council Some of them were people good at fighting. Other people were really good at reading, whether it be the law or the church doctrine. And there are a couple free radicals in there as well. We've got pictures of people on the Privy Council. It's a 14th century picture of the Chancellor of France, who is on the Privy Council. The Chancellor is the person who holds the seals of the king. When the king makes a law, makes a rule, makes a judgment, they'll unroll a scroll of parchment or paper and they'll write down the king's judgment. And then the chancellor will come over with his seals. If you look here, that's not a keychain or key ring. Those are the various seals of the king, all right? And they would sign that document and then fold it over or roll it up and then take a lit candle and drip some wax over the seam, and then take one of those seals and put the king's stamp on it. All right, so this person is the one who makes laws, who makes the king's word real. All right, so he's super important, and you see what's around him. He's surrounded by gold. He's wearing this fantastic robe. He's got a super expensive book because it's well before the printing press. Oh, and he could afford a fantastic portrait of himself, couldn't he? All right, so these were exceedingly powerful people. All right, we talked about this. Oh yeah, we're gonna start making these Venn diagrams ourselves. All right, so if the Merovingians and the Carolingians were this perfect blend of religion and military. All right, think about Charlemagne for a second. Charlemagne is a fantastic general, and he gets himself crowned Holy Roman Emperor, right? He gets to sit kind of in the same seat as Constantine did, right? Clovis kind of is told to do the same thing. Make of yourself a new Constantine. And so he combines religion and that Franciscus, the sharp edge of his battle axe, the military. But you know that both religion and military together are probably both negative feedback. And negative feedback, of course, is the resistance to change. It is the addition of stability to a dynamic system. Well, the combination of religion and military together, well, of course, gives you crusaders, right? On a bad day, I suppose it's also a pretty good definition of the Taliban, right? But we're going to add another circle to the Venn diagram. And throughout the semester, I'm going to be asking you guys to posit what that third thing could be, because that's what our kings add in. Yeah, they're the head of the church in France. Yeah, they've got a real pointy sword. But yeah, they've got something else that makes them different. Just in the same way that modern creepy crawlies, you know, primates and kangaroos and deer, they have a certain advantage, don't they, over alligators, geckos, and clams. They've got a gigantic brain. They tend to care for their young for a long time, don't they? They can keep themselves warm. They're warm-blooded. They have something that those earlier faunas do not have, right? And they're able to build a niche for themselves. We're going to get more into this over time. But I want you to consider, if you've got, negative feedback, piety, warmongery, what do you sort of hope is under that question mark? Okay, we're going to come back to this again and again and again. All right. Now, there's some space for this note-taking on pages 21 and 22. This will help you to organize your notes. The way that this is set up is basically, if we do this right, at the end of the semester, you're going to be able to go through and look at your notes and you'll know everything there is to know about the class. Now, it's true, I don't have all of the reading assignments in here yet. I've got about the first half or so. But this is meant to be about the size that you can just stick into the back pocket of a backpack or something. All right, so you always have this with you. You can study easily. You're going to notice that the first and last pages are there to help you as well. The very first page gives you a helpful mnemonic of all 15 Capetian kings. Now, if you don't know who the Beatles are, there's no help for you, okay? But hello, Ringo, hello, Paul. Ladies love Penny Lane. Let's play Penny Lane. Just play carefully, all right? Anyone can remember that. And so this is there to help you, all right? Hugh, Robert, Henry, etc. You should be able to do this. Okay? On pages 21 and 22, we're going to start talking about these players that are going to have to do with our guys. Now, this is a little hard to see. I'm going to pause this for a second so you can see better. There we go. Where I can, I'm going to give you all of our kings in a row, and I'm going to put little dots next to whom we're talking about. All right. It turns out it's really exquisitely difficult to go in time order here. All right. So we're going to do a little bit of skipping around, but I'm going to help you as much as possible to keep on track. For now, we're going to be talking about the generation just before Philip II Augustus. All right. Philip II is awesome. All right. And we're going to go in depth with him. So we're going to cover everybody in terms of breadth, but we're going to do a deep dive on Philip II Augustus. And this is sort of setting this up. All right, let's keep going. Did I see somebody, are there messages that I'm ignoring here? I don't see. There's something in chat. Let me make sure that I'm not missing anything. Oh, I'll send out a link for this. Okay, great question, perfect timing. I'll send out a link for this. You just get it on Amazon. It's super cheap, $5. Okay. All right, let's talk about these players. This is pretty wild, so follow closely. All right. You see, of course, the 15 Capetian kings, but we're going to concentrate on Philip II Augustus. But to talk about him, we need to back up in time just a little bit. And again, this backup might make you think of the early faunas, right? Let's do this. Across the water in England is a dude named Henry II Plantagenet, and I'll show you his lineage in a moment. You actually have his lineage written out for you, so that's helpful. His wife is Eleanor of Aquitaine, and we're going to come back to her. Eleanor is a player in all of this, and this should surprise you because you would think that in the Middle Ages, women would have few, if any, roles in how society worked. She was a powerhouse, and we'll talk about her. All right. We're also going to talk about Louis VI, and yes, this is one of our people. All right. You see how I marked him down here? All right, so we're setting up Philip II Augustus, but to do so, I'm trying to concentrate a little bit here so you can spot. All right. He has a son named Philippe. This is not this guy. This guy is gonna disappear. All right, but you need to know about him because he's at the center of a catastrophe. And this catastrophe is amazing and super important. Right? He's his first son. He has a second son, Louis the seventh, and he will be king. Now there are some things that you might have an instinct about, that you say, oh, well, oldest son always gets to be king, right? No, we're going to talk about this. Everything that we come with from the 21st century, we have to question. not every kingship in the Middle Ages was based on the first male child. And we'll see that. Look at Eleanor of Aquitaine, for instance. Okay, obviously not a male child. All right. We'll also talk about Louis VII's son, and this is our guy, Philip II Augustus. And he's pretty heroic to the point where I wrote a novel on him. Okay. Now, to build up Henry II Plantagenet's family tree, we need to go all the way back to this French-speaking warlord named William the Conqueror. He used to be William, Duke of Normandy, and this chunk of land right here is Normandy. Paris, by the way, is right here. So you see that Normandy is not far from Paris at all. Our Capetian kings are going to have to deal with this powerhouse all the time because they're right next door. All right. William the Conqueror in 1066 invades England, kills its king, and becomes its king. All right. He is French speaking. He comes with a certain style of reign that we're going to talk about. All right. Make a special note of this when we get there. He has a quick lineage. You don't have to know individual names. Okay. He names his next kid William. I want to point out what's the common name you've seen so far in France? The Capetians tend to name their kids what? Is it Louis? Someone say Louis. Right answer is Louis. Thank you. The correct answer is Louis. Louis is the French transliteration of the Frankish word Clovis. We've been talking about Clovis being the first Christian king of France, kind of a jerk, but since he was the first, later French kings will name themselves or name their kids after him. Why? Because that gives them legitimacy, that gives them authority. So you wonder why William the Red is named William. Well, because William the Conqueror was successful. You want that lineage, you spread that lineage around in as many ways as you can. All right, don't worry about Henry I. Don't worry about Stephen. Do worry about the Civil War that separates the old from the new. Civil wars are extinction type events. Do they make extinctions happen? No, but they open up niches for new thinking and new types of government and behavior. All right, so what comes into play in that Civil War? Well, the next ruler is named Matilda. All right, it's also an interesting name because William the Conqueror was married to a woman named Matilda. So Matilda was the first queen of England post Norman invasion, right? So it's important to name your kid Matilda. What do you notice about the name Matilda? It's easy. It's not a guy's name, it's a girl's name. That Civil War opened up a niche for women to be able to reign in England. And this is exceptionally important. That is not in place in France. In France, you must be a guy, all right? So after the Empress Matilda, then we get Henry II Plantagenet. Plantagenet's the last name, and we put things in order like that. Henry II Plantagenet. You can also call him Henry Fitz-Empress. This word Fitz is actually a French word because these people are still French speaking. It turns into fils in modern French. It means the son of. Okay, so Henry Fitz-Empress is Henry, the son of the Empress. He's telling you who he is. Henry II himself was born in what is now France. Now, I can't really show you. It's just, well, kind of underneath the chrome here, all right? He's born in France. He's French speaking. All right. The English crown is a French speaking Frankish era group of people. All right. Then there's Eleanor, and this is so important. All right. Take notes, then compare those notes after class. All right. Eleanor was also born in France. All right. Very near actually where Henry II was. She's French speaking. And now look at her name, Eleanor of Aquitaine, inherited Aquitaine. All right. You're saying, well, big deal. It's a gigantic deal. What was I saying about France? Is France a great big hexagonal country?
No.
France is a couple little counties here and there. At the time of Philip Augustus' birth, he couldn't walk from one side of his kingdom to the other without walking across enemy territory, right? So it was a pathetic set of holdings. Compare that with Aquitaine. Aquitaine is the salmon pink stuff here. Not bad, all right? So she is marriageable, and she owns about a third of modern France, all right? So huge tracts of land. The stuff in blue here is roughly where the French kings have any influence at all. They don't own it, they just have influence over it. Okay. Here's Eleanor, she's on the left. All right, she is going to crusade with her son. You've heard of her son before. Goes by the Lionheart. What's his first name?
Richard.
There you go, Richard the Lionheart. All right, the quintessential English king and crusader, right, is going to be on the opposite side from our guy Philip Augustus. All right, and he is Eleanor's son, but we're going to get to that. Not quite yet. Okay. On the other side of the channel are our guys, Louis VI and his son. Now, when you're reading your book, this one here, it's called Passacaglia. I wrote it. When you're reading that, you're going to see Louis VI called the Fat King, all right, because that was his epithet, Louis the Fat, all right. He had this amazing son. His name was Philippe. This is not Philip II Augustus. This is Philip II Augustus' uncle, all right. He is not going to become king, and you'll see why. He was fantastic. He was strong. He was brave. He liked to ride. He was an amazing fighter. He was interested in crusade, right? But he was also dangerous. He was selfish. And he had a really bad habit. Every night, he would clatter out of the city of Paris, cross one of those bridges that we talked about, and go off into the night. And obviously he was looking for a brothel or looking for a tavern. And then he'd maybe make his way back in the early morning in the wee hours. Well, he looked like he was going to be a great king, even if he was a little bit dangerous. One night, only his horse comes back. And the only thing that the chroniclers were allowed to write about this is that they found him and his limbs were so broken that he never woke up again. So Philippe is out of the picture. He would have made a terrific king, except that he was dangerous. This would be a really good time, by the way. Let me get the page 20. If you see the word catastrophe, this is the catastrophe I was talking about. All right, be very aware of this because this is absolutely central to our class, is understanding that the elder son here is out of the picture. And what do you do? Louis VI looks around, he says, wait a second, didn't I have a second son? Didn't I have more than one son? Where is he? Well, you're going to find out for a number of reasons that Capetian kings like to freeze dry the younger sons. All right? And to freeze dry the younger son means to give them something to do that will keep them out of trouble. Sometimes it's give the younger son a piece of land and tell him to occupy his time. Other times, as in this time, the younger son was told to go to a monastery to take sacred vows, sacred vow of obedience, chastity. So he has to do what he's told. He can't make any heirs of his own because he's chaste. Poverty, he can't own land, he can't raise an army, he doesn't own cash. And silence. Poverty, obedience, chastity, and silence. So he can't even complain about it. He was put in the monastery of Saint-Denis, just to the north of Paris. You're gonna see pictures of this later on. Okay. Now, being in a monastery, being told to sit down and shut up, how does that train you to be an outstanding king? Can being a monk, owning nothing, saying nothing, doing what you're told, does that teach you how to be a king? Does not teach you a whole lot about how to be a king. All right. There's something here that you can't see easily, or maybe you can't see. You're going to see this actually come up in your reading for Tuesday. Eusebius talks about sacred kingship, and you would think that a monk would make a perfect king if you read Eusebius. All right. Turns out he did not make a very good king. All right. His father decided to give him a leg up in the world and to say, okay, what's the best way to make Louis VII successful? All right. Again, piety and warmongering, all right, all about negative feedback, taking energy or change out of a system, right? When times change and you're forced to change, you better be good at changing, all right? So Louis VI gets Louis VII out of the monastery and makes him king, all right? And just needs to set him up for a wife. Who would be an amazing wife? Someone who held a lot of land. And that, of course, is Eleanor of Aquitaine, okay? Down here, imagine attaching Aquitaine, your tiny little spanglings of holdings, with this gigantic area. Wouldn't that be amazing? There she is again, okay? Well, it turns out Eleanor and Seven hate each other. They despise each other. Eleanor was going to write about Louis VII and saying he made a better monk than a husband. All right. Eventually, Louis gets so disgusted with Eleanor that he dismisses her. This is the verb you need to retain. The verb is not divorce, the verb is dismiss. Okay? Now, she still has all those huge tracts of land. What's she gonna do? Think she's just gonna go and cry in her beer? No, she is still desirable because of all that land, especially. Wouldn't it be interesting to go and find someone who will appreciate it? So she attaches all this land to England by marrying Henry II Plantagenet. And suddenly, the French crown is in extreme crisis. All right, it's a little hard to see on your screen, but the dark yellow is the stuff that the Capetians have any authority over it all. They don't own it, but they have some influence on those spaces. And then look at everything else that's pink, surrounded by that red line. That is all England now. England has now stretched from Scotland all the way to the Spanish border. Now you see that tautology of France being this hexagonal space. It isn't. France is the size of a couple small cities. That's it. Louis VII has blown it. So here's what he's facing. I'm not sure if you can see this. On my screen, it's a little bit blocked. Okay. They're going to have scads of kids. First child, Geoffrey, dies early. Next child, William, dies young. Then we get Henry, who would be Henry III, right? They actually call him Henry the Young King. Richard, who is Richard the Lionheart, and Geoffrey and John. I also always systematically forget that there's also Arthur in there, and there's a Blanche later on. So it's they just have scads of kids. We're going to talk about that again too. Okay, Richard the Lionheart. We are going to talk in depth about how Philip Augustus gets it all back, right? Now, does he have all the resources he wants? No. He owns a couple little cities, right? Can he attack England and win? What do you think? Can he just attack England? Can he use aggression? No. Aggression won't work, obviously. For you to use aggression, you have to be fairly certain of overwhelming force. Can he use submission? Oh, well, I'll just stand back here. I'll get it all back that way. Maybe somebody will have mercy on me. Is that going to work? Obviously not. All right. Aggression only works if you have all the resources in the world. Submission only works if you're completely okay with losing. There are other options, though. And those other options include maneuver. All right. And we're going to talk about that through the semester. All right. Let's
Quick question.
yes.
Go back to the other page.
Of course.
So did Eleanor remarry? Because you said he didn't divorce her. So like did she just remarry Henry?
Can I just smile knowingly, please?
That's fine. Gotcha.
That's a fantastic question. It is the correct question. Okay, because and the answer to that question is going to be a little bit how Philip Augustus deals with his problems.
Gotcha.
Fantastic question. All right. As we're doing these talks, these lectures, I know it's pretty unusual. I'm going to be basing a lot of my understanding of strategy on this book with the rather ominous title of On Thermonuclear War. The author, Herman Kahn, is not a very well-known name, but his student is well-known. His star student was Dick Cheney. Have you heard that name before? Dick
Yes.
Cheney, former vice president, former head of defense in the United States. All right. Herman Kahn in this book, you can find this in our library, uses supercomputers to model different kinds of thermonuclear war, different kinds of all-out war, partial war, proxy wars. He uses modeling, computer modeling, to simulate warfare. And simulation is a really important part of this class. And so part of your assignment for Tuesday, and I'll display a slide here so you can write this down, but part of your job for this semester is to play a game. We're going to play a simulation game, all right? And Dixie, are you there? Dixie, if you could like wave your hand so
I'm
people
here.
can see you. Dixie is our game master, and she's going to help us run this game. But you're going to play this game. And I think we need to have some sort of special prize for the person that wins this game. Now, we could do coffee, and it used to be that you could sit down and have coffee with people, and that was a desirable thing, except now you can't sit down and have coffee with people because it's contagious. And the universe is a little bit different. So I'm gonna put a slightly different prize for the winner. How about if I give you an automatic A on the final exam? So is it in your best interest to play the game and play it well? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, not everyone can win this game. There's going to be one winner, and therefore everyone else is going to get whatever they get on the final exam. But it's so important to play this game. Also, part of your homework for next time is to look at the rules for this game. It's also in your book. So if I can find it real quick. It's toward the back, and I used Roman numerals for some reason. It's LXXXVI, okay? And you'll see that number in just a moment, LXXXVI. And the game is going to make you strategize and work together and work against one another, and to consider some of the problems that we talk about in class. You should very carefully preserve every bit of information that you produce for the game. When you give in game orders, I want you to carefully reproduce those into your notes, because you're going to use those for your semester paper. All right, so don't just play the game and say, oh, well, you know, you win some, you lose some, and then at the end of the semester, don't worry about it. You'll have to worry about it. All right, if you would, just before the game rules in this little book, so this is LXXXIV. This gives you the formatting guidelines for the final paper, all right? And it says you have to have your game orders, because you're going to be submitting these orders to Dixie, and then she's going to update the map. It's going to be a lot like RISC, okay? But your game orders are actually part of your final paper. So don't forget to play the game, because if you win, great things happen, and even if you don't, you get to do good things with it. Are we clear? All right. So get a gander at the game rules. The game was written by a Roanoke College grad who is a computer scientist, and he writes in computer science-ese. And so it's not necessarily the clearest writing in the world, but we'll help you get started with that, all right? Your first game orders will be due in 1 week from today, all right? Now, one final thing. We're going to talk about this gentleman a little bit every time, or every other class period, I would say. Oswald Bölke. And this guy was pretty interesting. He was a fighter pilot in the First World War. This was exquisitely dangerous work. The life expectancy of a new pilot in World War I was 2 weeks. You were basically certain to die in combat, all right? He was a fighter ace, and he was very, very successful. I forget how long it took him to die. But among other things, his legacy is that he wrote down a series of rules to help other fighter pilots win their battles. You've got those rules at the very final page of your book, all right? Because I sort of imagine that if you were flying, you'd want to have a really quick reference. And well, here's your quick reference, the Dicta Bölke. all right? These are several rules for keeping you alive and winning battles. Now, there's another rule that I didn't write down, and this is going to be the one that, that I'll briefly discuss today. And that's the rule of keeping, if you're a fighter pilot, always give yourself 2 mistakes in altitude. Okay, so you're flying in a World War I biplane, all right? You've got a 2-week life expectancy, and you've got people out there attempting to kill you, all right? If you're flying above the ground, worst thing you could do is to get too close to the ground, because eventually the ground will rise up and smite you, right? So what you do is you build in a certain number of mistakes. Every time you make a mistake, you're going to lose altitude and get closer to doom, right? So always fly with at least 2 mistakes of altitude. What does this mean? Well, that means that you can make at least 1 mistake without terrible harm coming to you. Okay? I bring this up because I want you in this class and throughout college to always fly with 2 mistakes of altitude, all right? Meaning that if you've got a class where you can drop a quiz, don't drop the first quiz, right? Because that's a mistake in altitude that you want to keep with you, right? This is one of these systems dynamics rules. If you know where the bottom line is, always give yourself plenty of space to play with, to work with. And that is one of the dikta bulka that I've not given you here. All right. We finished about 17 minutes early, you guys. I know there is a ton of information in this first class. All right. I really highly recommend that you maybe make a Google Doc, start to answer these questions that you see as comprehension questions, lecture questions, or reading questions. Work together. What I'm going to do is after I'm done here is I'll send the class roster out, and then that way you can create Google Docs, work on them together, and then study from them together. I know that you're in different rooms in different places, but at least you're going to be pulling in the same direction. All right. This is what I want you to work on for next time. All right. I've tried to organize the questions into reading lots, parts A, etc. Just part A. I think it would also be very good to pool your notes on today's class because I go quickly and there's a ton of information. Do familiarize yourself with the game as well as with the elevator briefing. I'm going to give you a quiz on lecture and reading for next time, so definitely work together. I'm not here to sink you. I'm here to ask questions to make sure that we're getting it. All right. What are your questions? Are you guys okay?
I do have a question. Like,
All right, hit me.
I'm pretty confused about this game. Like, is there a certain site we're playing this on, or like?
Is there a certain what? I'm sorry.
Like, are we playing this like on a website or like the game?
No. It's about every week you're going to submit game orders, and this will say, I want to build an army in the city of Paris. I want to move my previous army one step over and attack Daniel. Okay, I'm going to bet this much that I can win that battle. All right, you'll write down all these game orders. You'll see that the format of the game orders is going to be as an elevator briefing, what your vision is, what your strategy is, and then the tactics are the actual game orders. You know, use this much point to go and attack this place, right? And then Dixie, who is our game master, is going to carry out all those orders. And so really the game is going to be altering a map. That map is going to evolve over time. All right, and you'll gain land, lose land, build armies, get killed on the battlefield, things like that. All right, so it's not an online game, but you'll submit orders in the form of elevator briefings.
Okay.
All right. Great question. Are there other questions?
So, quick question.
Yes.
Professor, do we have like a syllabus so that we know what we're going to read ahead? Because I'm a little bit confused with the assignment for next time. Like, do reading questions part A. Do you want us to do like the reading questions in the book, and what do you want us to read it with?
Okay. You should have several books.
Yes.
This is one of the reading books, and you'll see that in, say, part A. I'm going to turn to it real quick. All right. It gives you the reading assignment. That reading assignment is pages 2 to 13 in Passacaglia.
Okay.
A very brief article on theocratic monarchy in the Cantor book, the medieval letters. I don't have that right next to me. I should have brought that up.
Okay.
Right? So you're going to be reading in really only two places. This book of mine and then that book of medieval letters. All right. This book here is simply to help you organize as you're listening to lectures, as you're playing the game, and as you're doing readings.
Okay.
Short answer to your question, yeah, I need to get you a syllabus, but it's been so busy, I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
All right, doing my best. Give me another couple days. All right, other questions? There's this really cool rule. Hunter, was it you that asked that last question?
Yes.
Okay. Everybody in the room is thankful that you asked that question, because if one person asks the question, that means at least 5 people are thinking the question. Okay. You don't have to reveal yourself, but I know that everybody was saying, now, just exactly when do we get a syllabus? Well, as soon as I can write a syllabus. Are we cool? But by asking the question, you're validating a lot of people there, right? So everybody, please feel free to ask questions as you desire. To stop me, it's very, very difficult for me to see everybody moving. I'm not good at this yet, all right? So it's okay to interrupt me and to ask me to stop, back up, things like that.
Dr. Steve.
Yes.
I'm still a little confused about where the part A questions are. Are they in this book?
They're in this book.
That
They're in
book.
this book. All right.
Okay.
I'm going to hold up 2 books here. This one here that I'm moving around is a novel that novelizes the life of Philip Augustus.
Okay.
This book here is just for use in class, and these are questions that you can help yourself by answering as we do a lecture. This has reading questions, a couple things that aren't in the Cantor book, right? So this is simply there as just a help. There is nothing that's going to be due out of this. This is simply to get a bunch of information to you so you can organize it a little bit better. All right?
So we're not handing this in, we're just...
There's nothing to hand in. There's nothing to hand in. I'll tell you another thing is I don't have a lot of time to grade because of this COVID thing is just insane. Okay? And so we'll have occasional quizzes. You'll have a short quiz next time just to make sure everyone's doing the reading and all that stuff. But I'm really limiting the things that you're turning in. All right? Because this is hard. I know it's super hard for you. And, you know, I try to give off an air of confidence here, but this is hard. And so I'm going to take it easy on myself. Are we cool? All right. Other questions? All right. You guys are great. You're putting up with an amazing level of chaos. And I think that you're going to get a lot out of this class. It's I know we didn't quite get to meet, but we'll figure this out over time. Get together once I send out the roster for the class, and maybe make some Google Docs, work together so that nobody's lost. All right. You guys are great. I'm going to stop this share and then I'm going to stop this call. All right. Good to talk with you today. Great to see you guys. I've got students again and it feels great. All right. We'll see you in a couple days. Bye-bye.